All right,
We
we're
good?
good. Yep, we're good.
All right. Welcome, guys. We are live for our Selection Sunday talk show. It is 9 a.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central Time on Sunday night, May 5th. And tonight is the night that the NCAA Selection Committee will select the at-large bids for the NCAA tournament, as well as the seeding and bracketing. So I'm Matt Dunn, here with Stephen Rehfuss and Deemer class. Stephen, Deemer, welcome.
Hey, how you guys doing?
Excited to be here.
Good. We had a pretty crazy last few days of lacrosse. I think people had ideas going into this evening how things would shape out, but a lot of the conference tournament play really shook things up. But before we dive into that, I think one interesting thing to talk about is to kind of try to frame the selection process a little bit for anybody tuning in, and do our best to lay out what the selection committee's mandate is and try to describe some of the things they're looking at. Because if your timeline's anything like mine right now on Twitter, you see a lot of people posting their thoughts about who should get in the tournament anecdotally based off what they see. But we all know that that's not always the way the NCAA committee looks at bracketology and how they select teams. So to kick it off, I think that would be a good idea. And right here, I have pulled up the NCAA's NCAA.com, their selection process and Division I selection criteria. And so what that is the committee will utilize the following criteria to select and seed teams. And what they'll use is strength of schedule, results of RPI, head-to-head competition, and input from the regional advisory committee comprised of lacrosse coaches from all the AQ conferences. Three of those things, strength of schedule, index, results of RPI, head-to-head competition, are pretty black and white, so we can dive into some of those here. But the last piece is the regional advisory committee. So I think that's where a lot of the, debate can come in on who's doing well and how teams are just looking right now. So I'll pause there, kind of trying to frame out the selection criteria and process. You guys have any thoughts there? Anything to add going into this?
Yeah, I think going into it, I think a lot of people see like what teams are hot at certain times. Like obviously right now, Michigan's super hot. I think people are a little bit down on Maryland, but I think just important to note, as we've seen throughout the years, just that they do look at the whole body of work and strength of schedule throughout the entire season. So I think it's important to remember that the games in February and early March do have the same impact and hold the same weight as maybe games that we just saw this weekend.
Yeah, and it's also interesting. I think these are important times too, because I think this night also always elicits a lot of emotion, right? And I think just trying to understand and look at the selection criteria, and hopefully when decisions are made that it follows and it's pretty consistent with that alignment, and hopefully we'll get some explanation behind, some of the decisions as they come. And but I think as it comes every time around this time, nothing's always straight down the middle. So I'm sure there'll be plenty of debate and drama, and that's what makes it exciting.
Yeah, I feel like we have a pretty good, or at least, I was talking with Steven a little bit offline and us chatting, have a pretty good grasp on how this is going to shake out. But I don't want to take the whole thing for granted, because I feel like it could get shaken up a little more. And it has in the past. And I think that's, it was really when I dove into this the last few days that I kind of realized how we were trying to make predictions earlier this year and how fragile really like a loss is throughout the year and all these things as they shake out. And some teams that anecdotally I thought were really good, that I would have said maybe were one of the top teams, are probably on the outside looking in. And I think largely that's because when you look at RPI, which is a big factor, and I think has been a debate for whether or not that's a good metric to be used, the strength of schedule piece can really affect some of these teams. And then just so you guys know, because I kind of looked this up earlier to clarify it, what RPI is, it's the rating percentage index that'll be used. It's 25% of your team's winning percentage. So how well you do, your team's winning percentage is 25% of the RPI. 50% of it is your opponent's winning percentage. And then 25% of that is the winning percentage of your opponent's opponents. So the strength of schedule piece makes up 75% of the RPI, and 25% is made up of your winning percentage. So I just think that when we're looking at this number, I think you'll see it a lot when people make predictions for the bracketology, when teams, get seeded. I think it's important to understand what RPI is. What RPI isn't is anything to do with scoring margin, is anything to do with how well you've been playing. It's really just those things: your winning percentage, your opponent's winning percentage, and your opponent's winning percentage. So I think that's important when we discuss RPI and it comes out tonight, just to kind of have that framing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's super helpful. Obviously, taking a look at this weekend. So we're going to have there are 9 automatic qualifiers, and then we're going to have 8 at-large bids. So right now we know the 9 teams getting in. I can just run through these just to kind of set the stage. Out of the America East, we have UAlbany. Out of the Atlantic Sun, we have Utah. Atlantic 10, St. Joe's. Big East, Georgetown. Big 10, we saw Michigan win. Colonial, or CAA, we have Towson. Ivy League, we have Princeton. MAC, Sacred Heart, and then Patriot League, we have Lehigh. So that's 9 teams. 2 of these teams will be playing in the playing game. I would assume that Albany and Sacred Heart would be playing each other in the playing game based off of RPI. Albany's RPI is 36 and Sacred Heart's RPI is 32. The winner of that usually will go and play the number 1 seed, which I think will be Notre Dame, just with everything that they've been doing. So that leaves the 8 other teams. Just kind of wanted to set the stage in terms of what we're looking at in terms of seeding, who's getting in. Obviously didn't list an ACC team there, just they only have 5 teams in their conference. So you need 6 to be an AQ conference. So only 5 there. So we're not going to see an AQ, but we will see 3 to 4, most likely 4 teams in from the ACC.
Yeah, no, that's good framing. And I think when you talk about the RPI, when you look at those 9 automatic qualifiers, 2 of them are in the top 10 RPI wise, and that's Princeton and Georgetown. So that leaves, in the top 10, the other 8 will likely be the other in that top, 8 of the others in that top 10. And those other 8 are Notre Dame, Duke, Syracuse, Hopkins, Virginia, Denver, Maryland, and Penn State. And so if you kind of base it just off of RPI, that's what you're looking at there. But I think, a lot of people argue, at least what I've been seeing and hearing and from watching, you look at that leaves like a Penn or Cornell, a Yale out, an Army who was number 1 at one point this year. And I don't know what thoughts you guys have on some of those teams that should it be just that RPI that we're looking at, those top 8 teams, or how do you think about those other teams that are doing really well, looking pretty good, but just fall outside of that top range of the RPI?
I think that's just where it also comes back to how many spots are available. I think when you emotionally look at it, I think we all know, especially with the parity this year, that there's a lot of really good teams like the ones you just mentioned that are possible bubble. Multiple of those teams, 2-3 weeks ago, you wouldn't have been shocked if someone told you that they were a possible Final Four candidate or were capable of making a run, right? But then when you actually put the whole body of work into it, the importance of the RPI and how some of the results shook out, I guess that's just the way it goes sometimes, so it's obviously unfortunate. But I think that's where, with just the amount of spots there are and the size of the tournament, it's always going to leave a couple of these good teams, right on the bubble.
Yeah, for sure. And I think alluding to the bubble, and Matt, you're saying some specific teams, I think the big debate that I'm seeing online between Twitter and Instagram right now has more to do with kind of Penn State and Penn at the moment. And I think also Maryland and Cornell are also in that conversation. Just taking a look at Maryland, I think Maryland, from a RPI perspective, they're 7th in RPI. Their record is 8-5. Their losses are all to top teams. They lost to Notre Dame, UVA, Michigan, Hopkins, and Penn State. So you're looking at those, and they're not looking like bad losses. And then their wins, they have that win over Syracuse back in March. They have a win over Princeton, and they have a win over Penn State. So those are 3 top 10 really strong wins. And then taking a look at Penn State, they have an 11-4 record right now. They are 9th in RPI. Their losses, they lost to Colgate, Maryland, Hopkins, and Michigan. Obviously, that Colgate season opening loss takes a hit at kind of their overall RPI, but then they have some top wins. Within the top 20, they have Villanova, Yale, Cornell, Michigan, and Maryland. So Maryland being their best win, and that's at Maryland being 7th, and they just beat them in the semifinals. And then just taking a look at bubble out potentially, but they could also be bubble in. I think you obviously look at Penn right away. Penn 9-6, they're 11th in RPI, so they're behind a Penn State by 2. Their losses, they lost to Georgetown, UNC, St. Joe's, Yale, and then Princeton twice. But they do have top wins. They have Duke, which Duke's number 2 in the RPI, so that's a top 5 win, which holds obviously more weight than the committee, I believe, will have the difference between the top 5 win and then a top 10 win. And then you have Villanova, Cornell twice for Penn. So taking a look at those 2 teams, especially between Penn State and Penn, I think a lot of it will come down to maybe strength of schedule, how they hold the weight of maybe that top 5 win versus Penn State not having a top 5 win. Both obviously great teams, but also that would mean that we would be taking a look at with the Ivy League, are they going to be a 1-bid league? And then with the Big Ten, are they going to be 4?
Yeah, and I think one of the things just to kind of, one of the reasons that makes this even more challenging is you do kind of have two potential bid stealers here when you kind of look at, non-favorites winning their conference tournament, or those teams that wouldn't, that would get at larges, also winning their conference tournament opens more at larges. But you have both Denver losing the Big East, and you have Michigan winning the Big Ten. And so that's Michigan's a team that's not getting an at-large bid. If they don't win that tournament. And then teams like Hopkins and Maryland and Penn State that are all, very capable to get the at-large. So that steals a spot right there. And then Georgetown, you're not sure if they're getting the at-large either, goes to win the AQ. So now Denver steals a spot. So just goes to show that really hurt some of those Ivy League teams when a Cornell just took Notre Dame, down to the wire in like an 18-17 shootout. And Notre Dame right now, if you watch, the Duke game, the Virginia games, like they're head and shoulders kind of running the conference right now. So looking at a team like Cornell or a team like Army that was number 1 a month and a half ago to potentially be on the outside, that's kind of how you get there, is some of those big upsets in the conference tournaments.
And just piggybacking off that for Michigan, you have that game add in, and now you get a loss to make your 4th loss on your resume. And even though they're getting an AQ, that's not helping you, so it's like you miss out on the AQ, but then also you're adding to your resume another game that you get defeated. And that's also something where I do think there's like some emotion into it, where you have a 12 goal loss, to Michigan there too. So, again, even just the recency bias maybe creeping into play when you're thinking about like a bubble team as well.
Yeah. And I think just another thing to look at, taking a look at RPI, and Matt, you may have mentioned it earlier, but in terms of head-to-head matchups, and so you take a look at the RPI and you see there's Hopkins at 3 and Syracuse is at 4. These 2 teams played back in March, and Syracuse came away with a win. So when you look at seeding, who's going to be 3, who's going to be 4, then you take a look at Maryland and Virginia. Virginia is number 5, Maryland is number 7. Both teams have not been hot as of late, but just separate from that, Virginia did beat Maryland earlier in the year. So I wonder, when it gets down to it, are we going to seed Hopkins, like I said, in front of Syracuse? Are we going to see Virginia in front of Maryland, which I think will also just be important to note among some other factors, which we could get into.
Yeah, I think I took a stab, and I know, Steven, you did, and I'm sure Deemer been looking at it. I took a stab at trying to put together like what the seeding would look like. I think some of them are really obvious. Like I think Notre Dame at 1, I think Duke at 2. I think when you get to 3 and 4, you're probably looking at Syracuse and Hopkins. Both of them are 3 and 4 RPI. Syracuse 11 and 5 wins over Virginia and Duke. Hopkins 10 and 4. And then you probably after that get to the Virginia, Denver, Maryland realm of things, where I would see likely Virginia, kind of going next there. They do have the win over Maryland. Then you kind of look at Denver with, an RPI of 6 and 11 and 3, 11 and 3 record, probably after Virginia, then Maryland, then Princeton, to give you your top 8, what I think of as like the home games for the first round.
Yeah. definitely. And I think you're pretty spot on there. The other thing that I was taking a look at just in terms of kind of trying to put together my own bracket is just the travel distance for these teams. And I think this year is pretty unique in the sense of Utah is in the tournament, Notre Dame's in the tournament, and Michigan is in the tournament. And they're all going to have to fly somewhere. So someone's going to have to fly to Notre Dame. Utah's going to have to fly somewhere. And Michigan, someone will either have to fly to them or Michigan will have to fly to someone.
And Denver will likely be in it, right?
Yes, sorry, and Denver. I must mess that up. But with these teams, Denver, Utah, Notre Dame, Michigan, there's going to be flights. And I know that the NCAA, I think, tries to have there be the least amount of travel and save as much money as they can. But with the sport growing, and obviously the sport growing out west further, as we're seeing a team like Utah be in it, and Denver probably be a host along with Notre Dame, that's just something else to take into account if the committee ends up getting a little bit gimmicky trying to arrange travel schedules to kind of fit their quota.
Yeah, it isn't. I always forget that that's part of it. I think that we were talking the things they try to avoid. Rather than just go straight down the line of like who they think is the best, they try to avoid interconference first round matchups. So you probably won't see Maryland, Michigan first round matchup or any of those interconference plays, and as little travel as possible. And so what I had in my stack up here was Notre Dame obviously getting the play-in game, which, like you mentioned, probably Albany, Sacred Heart. Duke probably seeing Utah. So that's a flight, but Utah's flying anywhere. So Syracuse, Lehigh, that's a drive. Hopkins, St. Joe's, drive. Virginia, Towson, drive. Denver, Michigan, fly either way, but at Denver hosting. Maryland, Georgetown, quick drive. And then Princeton, Penn State, quick drive. So I think for travel, there's not many other ways you would really try to rig that. And by the way, I think that's a pretty fair lineup of the teams too.
Yeah, for sure. I think you're spot on. I do have Notre Dame, Albany / Sacred Heart as the 1. I have the 2 being Duke, Utah. 3, I can't decide between 3 being Cuse or Hopkins, but I have Hopkins playing Towson and Cuse playing Lehigh. At 5, I have Virginia playing St. Joe's. I think St. Joe's is sneaky good. Looking at 6, Denver playing Michigan. 7 being Maryland, Georgetown. And then 8, the Princeton, Penn State. So pretty similar. And I guess we'll see.
I think where my head goes with that too is the quarterfinal matchups that this is going to set up for. Obviously, there's a couple little tweaks you could throw on some different wrinkles there, and comparing that even to what Inside Lacrosse came out with. But the quarterfinal games are going to be either big time rematches early, or just some really competitive games that we haven't always seen, and I think it was something that I tweeted about a couple weeks ago, just thinking about with the parity in the men's game, but also the women's game this year. I think the quarterfinals could possibly set up for some of the best quarterfinal games in history, which could be really exciting. So, you have some of these blue blood teams that, maybe aren't as going to be as seated as highly, but then, again, when you have all these seniors and fifth years there as well, like anyone can make a run. And, Virginia creeping down to a 7 is going to be scary for anyone at those top seeds. So when you look at it like that too, it's going to be fun to see. And you mentioned St. Joe's. I was really impressed with the Richmond game. It was electric. It was a lot of fun to watch. And, they've got a lot of talent on the offensive end. And I love the way their 10-man ride was causing chaos in the game. So that's going to be a tough first round matchup for anyone too.
How does Steven, how does Virginia end up ahead of Maryland? Because I'm looking at that. I saw some people push that. What I see is Virginia's 10-5 with an RPI of 5. Maryland's 8-5 with an RPI of 7, and Virginia has the head-to-head over Maryland. But I've seen a couple brackets where Virginia is Maryland's ahead of Virginia.
Yeah, I don't know because I have Virginia being a 5 seed and I have Maryland being a 7 seed. I
Okay.
don't see Maryland jumping them. I'm seeing more online of Maryland not hosting, just because of their recent, I guess, struggles a little bit and how they exited the Big Ten tournament. But I do have Virginia hosting at 5 and Maryland hosting at 7.
The other thing is like when you look at these games, like really, and we could be totally wrong, but like, 9 of these teams are guaranteed, and like 6 or 7 of them, 6 of the other at larges are pretty much guaranteed. There's like, kind of 2 spots maybe you're looking at. Um, you know, uh, these aren't, besides the first 2 seeds, maybe, if Syracuse plays like Lehigh or St. Joe's and Towson, and if Michigan's unseeded and Georgetown and Penn State, like Lehigh, St. Joe's, Towson, Michigan, Georgetown, Penn State, like those are all good, like really good teams. That and there's teams that aren't making it that could upset like some teams that'll be in it. Like we know the parity in college lacrosse right now. So I mean, Deemer, you're talking about a great quarterfinal, but like this first round, aside from, you think that Notre Dame versus Albany or Sacred Heart and Duke versus Utah might be an easier game, you think. But the rest of them, I really kind of struggle to say like anything's a blowout, and even the higher seed is that big of a favorite.
Yeah, and even that if we do get Cuse Lehigh, that's going to be an interesting storyline with Muley transferring.
Yeah,
And really hats off to the Lehigh coaching staff for coming out of the Patriot League, with the AQ. Scott Cole has been great down the stretch. Checo had 8 caused turnovers in the semifinal,
it's wild.
and they're on a roll too. Even watching that, what proved to be the game-winning goal from Quinn Armstrong. They've reloaded, and they've found a way to get it done. So hats off to them, and again, it's another team that you're really going to have to spend a lot of time prepping for, all week.
Who do you guys think? So we're like what 6 minutes out. Um, who do you think's going to be the biggest? The most likely snub from this that maybe you feel probably deserves it the most. We'll say forget RPI. Who do you think deserves it the most that might not get it here?
I think that there is a chance that Penn State is left out. Just from, I think Penn could sneak in with that win over Duke. I think that is a huge win. I think and I know the committee doesn't necessarily go by it, but I think Penn State, I think they're a team that can win it all, and they have a really good chance of going far. Not to say that Penn can't, but just from watching Penn and between their goalie play, between TJ Malone and just their body of work, and especially, I guess, seeing them last year in the Final Four as well, I think that's a team that could make another run, super well coached. But I could see there's a scenario where they're left looking from the outside.
Yeah, I would say, of even just talking about a lot of these bubble teams, I think I would be the most surprised by Penn State not making it. And especially, not just like emotionally the feel of, where they were kind of starting to get on a roll to, and then get to the Big Ten tournament, knock off Maryland, which they really haven't done much of in general. And then to go from feeling like they could just be out of it. I think that one would probably feel like the most shocking to me, and especially with the success they've also had against the Ivy League, which again is now going to kind of turn out to not be that beneficial for them. And then obviously, I think early we thought that Colgate loss was shocking, but then it was like, oh shit, it's not that shocking. Colgate's pretty good, and then they couldn't get it done down the stretch in the Patriot League. So then that loss looks a little worse. So I think that one would shock me the most.
Yeah, that Colgate one hurts them. Once again, it's not that Colgate's a good team. We know that, but when you look at like how they calculate RPI and things like out of top 20 loss, stuff ends up biting you down the line. Yeah, so I think Penn State. I think when you look at like I think we're pretty sure like a Cornell won't get in, But when I think you look at like the talent on a team and how they play, and I just go back to that Notre Dame game, and you look at Cornell's offense against Notre Dame, you're telling me that offense doesn't make the NCAA tournaments pretty wild, because you could see that team making a really good push into the tournament. Not that it's set in stone they won't make it right now. We got to wait and see, but it's looking like they're on the outside. And to me, forget about RPI and all that, like who's playing ability right now. And I know they kind of hurt that they dropped in the Ivy League tournament, but like them at their best is really, really good, especially offensively.
Yeah, for sure. And I know we've been talking about men's this entire time, and I know the show is going to start in 3 minutes, but the women's selection show started at 9 and just got the full bracket here. So I just want to run through their top 8 seeds. So Northwestern is the 1 seed. Boston College is the 2 seed. Syracuse is 3, and Maryland is 4. And then the 8 seed. So who Northwestern would have to play eventually would be Penn is on their side. Penn's the 8 seed. Boston College, they are the 2 seed. Notre Dame is the 7 seed. And then we have Syracuse as a 3 seed. Yale would be the 6. And then that leaves Maryland being that 4 and Virginia being the 5. So some good representation. We take a look at the ACC between Syracuse, BC, Maryland, and Notre Dame and UVA, obviously all seeded, but then some really good representation from the Ivy League. Deemer, I know we've talked a lot about the Big Ten this year on our live show, but Ivy League has been strong, and that game between Yale and Penn was great today.
Yeah, I think that was huge for Yale, getting that win and then bumping up, getting the 6 seed. I think that win probably is what might have caused Michigan to get knocked to unseeded. So I guess Notre Dame will be hosting that. And so Michigan plays Mercer, and then they'd rematch with Notre Dame. And that's been a big, early tournament battle that always gets matched up. Penn's had a really good season, and then it looks like Penn State and JMU will square off, and they'll play the winner of Robert Morris, Maryland. So Virginia's had a really strong season, and but it's again, looking at this, just quick eye test, a lot of great first round matchups, and then really setting up for a lot of great second round ones on Sunday.
Yeah, definitely. And just taking a look, and I think I'm reading this correctly. So Syracuse and Northwestern will both have a bye, but their first round game would be Syracuse is going to play the winner of Stony Brook and Niagara. Have to kind of assume that maybe Stony Brook's going to win that one. Syracuse lost to Stony Brook earlier in the year, so they're going to be tested right away. You look at Northwestern, they have a bye as well. They play the winner of Denver, Stanford. And last year, Denver, Northwestern was a Final Four matchup. So this is also going to be a great tournament and super competitive. And you're looking at 2 of the top teams, and they're going to be faced with top talent and top competition right away. So we are, I've got my computer up. The men's selection show is now about to begin. So a lot of what we've been talking about, I know we were just talking about women's, but the men's, we were going to get answers. I had the women's up during that time, and they were firing off teams for kind of the whole time. So I don't know if they're going to do that or kind of wait till the end. I would assume that they would kind of just get right into it and start discussing.
Yeah, I got it pulled up here now. And those of you that don't know, I believe it's on ESPN2. Is that correct?
Upgrade, big steps.
Yeah, I'm on Plus right now on the other monitor right here. So hopefully they keep Plus up to speed with ESPN2.
I got YouTube TV up on another laptop.
Yeah. You know what's the worst is when they have things on ESPN like live, but they don't have it on Plus. When the Big Ten, or I think the Big Ten would do that too, and not have it on the BTN Plus. If you didn't have like the cable, I don't know. Watching college lacrosse can be the most for somebody that watches as much college lacrosse as I do and we do. Somehow it's like the most challenging thing ever to navigate some of these games, especially earlier in the season, of the pluses and the cable streams.
Yeah, I thought this year was probably the best that it's been. I think it could still be better. I would also just like to get the chance to actually watch like Georgetown, Denver, without having to pay like $15 to $30 for one.
I feel like Denver's man down was like 73% this year or something crazy. And I was like, I've barely been able to see it. I wanted to watch them, but none of the game streams come out, and I don't have Flow TV. So, and out of principle, I'm not making the move on Flow TV yet. So,
yeah,
I will say one of the things I've always appreciated that Denver does well, though, is their SIDs are really good about sharing the stream content to their Twitter, which I think if you're an athletic program like that's just a layup for creating buzz and traction around your program, because otherwise it's really hard for anyone else to access the game and see the players and stuff. So I just think that's low hanging fruit for anyone trying to create buzz around their program, especially if they feel like they're not getting the same attention as, some of the top few from all the media outlets. But also, guys, I just did want to mention, thanks to everyone for tuning in tonight. We've had over, 40 people consistently on for our largest game cast, and, some great, great comments in the chat. Couple banter comments too, coming after Duke today after the ACCs. But I will mention it was interesting to see Patrick McEwen mention how Notre Dame's got the best resume in tournament history potentially. So the amount of top 5 wins that they had is impressive, and they were strong today. So they're gonna they're looking like the favorite. I think Matt, you said it, kind of head and shoulders above the pack right now.
I heard a comment the other day, and I'll keep it anonymous. It's from a D1 coordinator at one of the ACC schools, mentioned that playing Notre Dame right now is like playing Maryland in 22. Like the way they're kind of viewed in the league. It's like that year Maryland went undefeated. It's just there's not really an apparent weakness, and the way they're playing right now, it's just so, a lot of teams you can find a crack, you catch them on the off day. And you can, they get taken down. Notre Dame is just so consistent and so strong in multiple areas of the field that's kind of the way they're viewed, and they've performed to that, especially playing Virginia back-to-back and then Duke, and convincing wins in all of them. And so I've been very impressed by them, and I am trying to curse them right now as much as possible and jinx them. And so I hope this works.
Yeah, I think when Entenmann is playing like he did this weekend, they're obviously going to be nearly impossible to beat. But with that said, I feel like the whole team just plays with so much more confidence when he's on. And a couple weeks ago on our live show on Fridays, I was talking about Notre Dame's depth didn't seem to be off the charts. So like in comparison to a Maryland in 2022, when they just had stars all over the field and had like a second midfield line that could play anywhere. I think Notre Dame's depth hasn't been highlighted from the midfield. And then this weekend, seeing their second and third line, multiple different guys scoring. It wasn't just the Kavanaughs, wasn't just Jake Taylor, wasn't just Eric Dobson. So I was like, well, I'm completely wrong. And they do have a lot of depth. So they look very scary going into this tournament.
Yeah, well, Steven, I trust you and I think you're smart. So I started saying that too. And then their third midfield's like lighting it up.
I know.
Wait a second.
I mean, when I was saying it, the stats were showing that they didn't have much.
I'm like, yeah, but they're not very deep. It's like, well, their second midfield's like scoring every possession. I'm like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, they have really turned it up.
Here we go. You guys see that? Notre Dame?
I see Notre Dame has won. Duke 2.
Neither of those are a surprise.
Yeah, no surprise.
This is where it gets a little interesting. Cuse up next? What do you think? Hopkins.
But I think
Hopkins.
Hopkins 3.
That's not.
Cuse has to be 4.
Cuse has to be 4. Right?
Yeah.
I think you're looking at Cuse 4.
Cuse 4.
All right. This is where it gets a little interesting.
I know the RPI that Hopkins RPI is higher than Syracuse's, but I am surprised just based off of Syracuse's top 5 wins and their head-to-head matchup. I also obviously am a big Syracuse fan. So
yeah, well, I actually had Cuse ahead of Hopkins too. So I kind of thought they were going to go that way.
It's also just crazy to think about, guys, if you just reflect back to early in the season, again, Cuse being younger, got some transfers in, how they really ascended, and especially Odirna's impact on the defensive end, has really, been huge for them. And then, even that Hopkins Denver game early on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This Denver's now 5 now that you mention it.
Denver 5.
Yeah. And to think that Hopkins Denver game, Virginia 6, that Hopkins Denver game was so odd, but I didn't think those were going to be 3 and 5 in the NCAA tournament at the beginning of the year.
And that win for Denver turned out to be massive. And that was one of the crazier endings to a game I've ever seen.
Yeah. They were down 12-7.
7-8 is going to be interesting here. We have 7 being Maryland. And 8 being Princeton.
I think Maryland, Princeton. All right, Maryland 7.
Maryland 7.
So,
and once again, we talked about Maryland 8 and 5, 7th in RPI.
So this is probably Princeton. Georgetown.
Wow, Georgetown. Wow. Surprised there. Maybe that. I mean, they're the only team in the country to beat Notre Dame.
Yeah, that must have been huge for them.
Very surprised there.
That's interesting.
So Notre Dame, Duke, Hopkins, Cuse, top 4.
Notre Dame, Duke, Hopkins, Cuse, Denver, Virginia, Maryland, Georgetown.
I think when taking a look at the bracket, and we were just talking about Notre Dame, I think if you're going to play Notre Dame in this tournament, I think you really want to catch them in the finals. I know that probably sounds simple, but I think when you play them first round, quarterfinals, or semifinals, you're going to get them on a week's rest. I think the best chance to beat them is definitely going to be off of just a day's rest, which would be in the final. So I think good to be the 2 or 3 seed and whoever those guys end up playing.
Yeah, and I also think, and you don't wish this, but maybe they get a little banged up in the tournament, and because you play a healthy, fresh Notre Dame team. And by the way, they look like, talking about the fresh battle in the ACC tournament, like they looked pretty fresh today. So I don't know if you're getting it, with their depth. And they actually, I saw a stat, they are second in the NCAA in like possession time. Which, to have a goalie like Entenmann, an offense like Notre Dame, an EMO like Notre Dame, and to be second in possession time is a lethal combination.
Well, they win, like, I don't know what Lynch is going at the faceoff X, but it felt like he won like 75% of the faceoffs that he took this weekend.
Yeah, and they ride well, so they steal a few back there. I feel like they're pretty smart in possessions with how they, work them. Not a lot of careless turnovers.
So that would set up a possible Notre Dame Georgetown rematch.
Yeah.
For the quarters. And then that would set up a possible Notre Dame or Georgetown versus a possible winner of Cuse Denver, correct?
Yes. Yep. And then we could get Duke Maryland.
I haven't seen a good old fashioned Duke Maryland game in a while.
And then Hopkins would play, who's 6? Virginia. That's a lot of blue blood matchups there. And if the higher seed wins those games, which, as we've seen in the past years, doesn't always happen.
I know for Maryland too, just the status of Urksa. I haven't heard too much about that since, obviously, kind of the initial injury, and I saw some stuff that he was, I believe, released from the hospital. So not sure. There, but yeah, it's gonna create a lot of big time matchups and rematches too, especially if we got Hopkins Virginia rematch, that will be electric.
Yeah. Obviously I don't know anything about the Urksa situation other than what's public. He's a huge part of that team, and it does change it. The Maryland Princeton game. The Maryland, I'm pulling it up, 13-7, I believe it was earlier this year, Maryland Princeton. If I'm not mistaken. Yeah, 13-7 in February, though. So we know that's a different, totally different ball game.
Just looking at this here, obviously no Ivy team is hosting. We had thought Princeton would be that 8 seed. This makes me think that Penn will be left out. I think if the Ivy was really strong, that Penn would have a better chance of getting in. But if Princeton's not going to be a host, and if the Ivy doesn't have, the Ivy doesn't have a seeded team, and we see Maryland being 7, it makes me think, and also Hopkins within the Big Ten, it makes me think that Penn State is going to be getting in over Penn.
Yeah. So there's, just to clarify, there's one at-large spot left. There's what Georgetown's the only AQ that's been used in the top 8, and there's one at-large spot left, and that's most likely, we think, going to be Penn State. There was obviously, Steven's making the point, Penn was a team in contention, but to see Princeton not in the top 8 makes it look less and less likely to see another IB team in there. Which I think
I'm seeing a little Liam Murphy being a little upset at Maryland being a 7 seed. I'm starting to scroll the timelines here, seeing what else is.
Is that on Twitter? Is that on Twitter?
Yeah,
he's been very vocal about the Big Ten ACC bias the last couple of days. It's kind of like the goal mouth thing, right? It's you cannot like it, but when you talk about what the criteria are for it, like the rule for the goal, you might not like the goal mouth rule, but the rule is you end up in the goal mouth. It's not a goal unless you were, pushed. The RPI is a big part of the. You might not think some of these teams look good, but right now the selection criteria, the RPI is a big part of it. And on paper, maybe Maryland is one of the top RPI teams.
Guys, one thing we haven't talked about yet, which is obviously a little early given the back half of the bracket we haven't seen, but I'm curious to think about the impact on the Tewaaraton race in terms of who gets in and what possible finalists or guys that have been in contention are left watching at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think Brandel will be a finalist, but I think it's going to be almost impossible for him to win it with them not being in the tournament.
Does Notre Dame get 2 finalists?
I would say so after this weekend, honestly.
I would say so, yeah.
I think Entenmann continuously makes like an insane case for himself. And Pat Cav obviously has been a guy that's been up in that rank. So then you're looking Brandel, Schellenberger, Pat Cav, Entenmann, O'Neal.
Yeah. Penn State is in. Penn State playing at Georgetown.
Wow, that's a tough first rounder.
Yeah.
That is. And that's a tough second round game for if you're looking at Notre Dame, who's the 1 seed. I think they can take care of business in the first round, but getting the winner of Georgetown, Penn State, Georgetown, who the only team you lost to, and then Penn State, who I was just talking about earlier, who I am pretty high on just from the talent and athleticism that they do have.
And so that's the last at large. So we know everybody else who's going to be in the tournament. We just don't know the seeds. The hard thing with you try to look at these teams, Georgetown just, grinded through the Big East tournament. And then Penn State just smoked Maryland and kind of gets smoked by Michigan. It's really hard to gauge, you look at Notre Dame like they're on a roll. It's really hard to gauge either of these 2 teams because it's just, you don't know, I guess, what version of the team you're going to get. Penn State, when they're on, they're tough,
Georgetown's interesting too because they're 12-3, 2-goal loss to Hopkins. I think an anomaly first game of the year against Loyola.
Yeah.
They went on a big run since, and they had the 2-goal loss at Denver. So they seem like they've just found a way to get it done. They've had a couple seniors step up. They've been in tight games, and that's what you need in tournament time.
So we see Michigan will be at Denver. Michigan, obviously one of the hottest teams right now.
Yeah. That'll be
That's a great game.
Yeah, that's a great game.
I'm taking Michigan in that.
I am too. I think.
And I'm taking Penn State versus Georgetown.
I'm excited to see that Michigan Penn State film because again, just I didn't see as much live, but the commentary around the Michigan offense, was pretty impressive. So and obviously the numbers they put up on Penn State are big. So
yeah, so that's interesting because I'm surprised Princeton's kind of getting. I thought
Did they just show? Is Towson playing Syracuse?
I just heard a Weishar. We got the TV on in the other room. My stream is lagging. I'm hanging on by a thread here.
Yeah, I think I missed that. I think Syracuse Towson.
Syracuse Towson?
I believe so. They just showed highlights of both.
Yeah.
I wasn't watching the screen. Yeah, we've seen Hopkins Lehigh.
Hopkins Lehigh. That makes sense. Syracuse Towson. I had St. Joe's in that spot. Okay. Just adjusting. So
I have to think Virginia St. Joe's.
Last time Cuse and Towson matched up, was that the infamous
yeah, don't bring it up.
Don't bring it up. Just there was a big shot in that game years ago.
Is that the Joe Sider?
That might be the Joe Sider.
Towson was unbelievable that year. That was 2017. That was my freshman year.
They were very good that year. Yeah.
Very, very good. But yes, that's the last time that Towson and Syracuse have played.
Lehigh Hopkins.
See that on social media.
Malloy can't run away from that.
The Coach Crawley, Lehigh Hopkins. Little
wow.
Virginia St. Joe's. Okay.
Yep. That's a good game.
Yeah, these are all good games. Deemer, so I know you posted something on it, but Levi went 7-2 against Richmond.
Yeah, he really exploded, and I just did a breakdown on. I just kind of saw it live. He had a tough turnover in an 11-11 game, and then just came back to have a hand in the next 3 goals for St. Joe's, and he really put the foot on the gas. Carter Page had 6 goals. Matt Bomer was extremely solid and quarterbacked the offense. They've got a lot of weapons, and they're playing really well together.
Maryland, Princeton. These two played earlier this year. Maryland won this game 13-7.
And that's a game, Matt, you talked about early in the season. I think the other reason that's so critical is that Princeton has such a young team, so especially with, two dynamic freshmen early on in their careers, they've been a team that has really continued to pick up steam and gel and find their mojo. So I think that's going to be a game that, again, barring obviously experience in the tournament, that's going to be hyper competitive.
Yeah, and we all know February lacrosse is so different than May lacrosse. It's just so different, especially with a younger team. Maryland, Princeton, okay.
And then that would leave Duke, Utah.
Kind of saw that one.
Yep.
Okay. Anish posted all these things about, I'd have to pull them back up, but there's a lot of good stats on how seeds have fared over the years. I don't think, a lot of those the last 20, I think, or so years, I don't think a number 1 seed has really lost. But there is a lot of scenarios where, you don't get out of the first round where all the seeded teams win.
Yeah. We most recently saw that in 2022, I believe, when Georgetown lost to Delaware. Georgetown was a 2 seed. And there have been a couple other 2 seed losses in the past. I think most notably when Syracuse lost to Bryant in the first round. I believe they were a 2 seed.
Yeah, they were because we played Bryant the next round. That was us, and I remember
cheering.
Yeah.
Championship game record by seed. That's a cool one. 3 seeds, 5-2 in the last 20 tournaments.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have that pulled up right now?
Yeah. So the number 1 seed in the last 20 tournaments is 6-5. Number 2 is 2-2. Number 3 is 5-2. Number 4 seed is 3-1. And these are all in the championship games. And then 5 seeds 1-3, 6 seeds 0-2, 7 is 2-1, 8 is 0-0. No games for the 8 seed.
It's just like, and not to go off topic, but I just saw Michigan pop up. Like it's just a good reminder every year. Like when I saw Michigan play UVA in the beginning of this season, I thought UVA was the best team in the world, and I thought Michigan didn't stand a chance this year. And then you just look at where everything is now. Virginia is good, but they're struggling a little bit, and Michigan is heated up like you want to believe. And I just think that goes to show the talent right now in Division I lacrosse. Like it's all there. Obviously there's some teams that have more, but any of these teams have enough that you get your stride going, you get connected, and you get the right mojo, the right culture, the right energy, the right pieces in the right places. Any of these teams can beat one another right now. Maybe 85% of them in there can beat any of them right now, I would say, realistically.
So, guys, just to review some of the teams that were left out, is that confirmed? Cornell, Yale, and Penn?
Yeah, they just listed those 3 as the first 3 out. I do not have – it's a commercial break now, but I think they were 11, 12, and 13 in the RPI. Makes you think if the Ivy League tournament went in a different direction at all, maybe if Cornell had beaten Penn or Yale had beaten Princeton, just like what the different outcomes would be if the Ivy could have been a 2-bid league or not. But we are seeing Ivy League only getting 1 team in Princeton.
Do you think, just to go, just to have the conversation, do you think, is the current method of selection, the RPI, do we think it's a good method of selection?
I candidly don't know enough. I mean, I know you listed it out at the start. From the past years and just thinking about it, I feel like no. I do think that the eye test does need to come into play, and I think you need to take into account how a team is playing. I take a look back at 2022 when UVA was the only ACC team to get in, and Maryland won that year. I think the team that was most capable of beating Maryland at that time was Notre Dame, and they got left at home. And I just thought it made for not the most competitive tournament in the sense of I think Notre Dame was ranked number 2 in like the Inside Lacrosse coaches poll or media poll. And to leave that team at home just felt like, all right, well, this would have been – everyone wants to see these 2 teams play. We have to see if anyone can compete with Maryland. And I know that Cornell ended up having a pretty close game with Maryland in the national championship. But to just answer your question, I think eye test and how teams are playing as of late maybe should come into play more so the eye test. But it's tough.
And guys, it's interesting going off that. I was actually comparing the men's versus the women's in the selection process. And one thing I do think makes sense when it comes to, trying, like when people are talking about the eye tests, I like the idea of not just the eye test, but like you're saying, in the women's have it in the secondary criteria, late season performance, last 6 games, including conference tournaments, winning percentage and strength of schedule. So I think there is something to be said for, how a team is playing down the stretch, and if they can make that late push, and that might get them over the hump. It is something that, I do wonder if it would, maybe you'd have to do some reverse, looking at the last 20 years to see how many of those quote unquote snubbed teams would have maybe gotten in with something like that. But I think it's worth debating.
It's worth debating. The challenge, a great example though, is in that scenario. I mean, Penn State's obviously in. But a Penn State scenario, they beat Maryland by 10, and then they get crushed by Michigan. How do you factor that into the eye test? Because I think you're talking about eye test. Yeah, you're talking about a feel, but you're talking about scoring margin too. How handedly did you beat this team? how badly did you lose to certain teams? And if you look, I think you map that, there's some crazy things all over the place. I do like isolating it to the last 6 games, last 4 games, maybe, to say, let's give some value to teams that are peaking right now because, they're probably the best teams going into the tournament. But, I think you can make a case for it. It matters how well you play early in the season too.
Yeah. Alluding to that, when I was watching the Penn State Michigan final, the announcers were commenting on how it felt like kind of Penn State put everything out there against Maryland, right? They've had a really tough time. They'd only beaten Maryland once. So they kind of exuded all their energy. I also wanted to point out that between the Ivy League tournament, the ACC tournament, and the Big Ten tournament, the team that played in the winner of the first game turned out to be the eventual winner of the tournament. I know we've talked about this as well on our talk show. And Matt, I was kind of poking fun at Maryland because Maryland is known to get the second game on championship weekend when they were kind of making that long run, and they could obviously be back there this year. But just interesting to note that the winner of the first game did win. So just as we look forward to the Final Four and we see, I would think that Notre Dame being the 1 seed, if they make it to the tournament or to the Final Four, that they would get the first game, but I don't know if that's the way that they do it. But just something to keep note of.
It's discretionary. They get to pick.
Guys, any or maybe I'll just frame it like this: if you don't want to, call any upsets or what are your favorite, 1 or 2 matchups that you're looking forward to watching and why? Off the top of your head so far.
I'm going to leave Maryland Princeton out of it because obviously I'm invested in the Maryland game, and that's just going to be a big game for me. I think Denver, Michigan, and I know Steven's probably going to say it too because we mentioned it. I think that's going to be a really interesting game just because of how hot Michigan is right now. And I just think that's going to be a really interesting game. I think Hopkins Lehigh will be interesting, or Georgetown Penn State. I mean, I think they'll all be good. I think Hopkins Lehigh could be pretty interesting too.
Yeah, the one that's sticking out for me that I'm excited to see is Penn State Georgetown. I'm excited, as I was saying earlier, I haven't seen Georgetown play a ton. And I know they had 2 really close overtime wins to get out of the Big East tournament. Penn State obviously had that awesome game against Maryland and then really was tripped up by Michigan. So I would like to see how they rebound. I think that has a chance to be a great game. I also always think like the 8-9 game is obviously really close just with the seeding. Excited to see this Princeton Maryland game. I think Princeton is the hotter team right now, coming off of the Ivy League championship. Maryland is skidding a little bit. Very curious to see if Braden Ericksa plays. Obviously really happy that he's healthy and fine and was able to get out of the hospital. But if he plays, I think that game is completely different than if he doesn't. I think he's just super dynamic. So really excited to see those 2. And yeah, looking forward to a great tournament.
Love it. I'm excited for Virginia St. Joe's. I think, Virginia's length on defense versus a lot of really talented, multidimensional St. Joe's offensive players. And I also think both teams have some different versions of a 10-man ride that make for an exciting game. So I think that's one for me. I would also say that, I would also echo the Denver, Michigan game. I think that's going to be a fun one, exciting for Matt Brown in his first year as head coach. Obviously, Michigan's getting hot. Come tournament time, they made it to the quarterfinals last year, and they brought a lot back. And not to mention Justin Tiernan, 5-goal performance. He's trying to make a push towards a possible 60-pack this year. So it's a lot of great action, and I'm excited.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think this shook out the way we thought it was going to. You're missing some exciting teams, obviously, not having. I think Penn's had a good season, not having like a Kirsten along and some of that Cornell guys, in the tournament anymore kind of stinks. Not having a Brandout continuing to go, but when you kind of look at the AQs and the at-larges, and you look at the teams, I think it shook out properly based off the selection criteria. However, there are some really talented teams, really talented players that are, unfortunately, their season's done. And I just, I wish there was a world where you could see like the Brandows and the Curse and the Longs still continue to, go into playoff time.
Yeah, for sure. I think watching those games, I didn't necessarily expect that was going to be the last time that I was seeing them play this year. But is what it is. And I think there's been a lot of talk about, well, we got to expand the tournament, but I do think it makes all these games all year long. They all matter. They're all big time games. I mean, you see, we were talking today about Penn State playing Colgate, and that was the first game of the year. And that still had some implications on tonight.
I mean, what's that, February 15th, February 20th?
Probably even earlier.
Yeah. And how big Georgetown's Notre Dame win.
That's February 3rd.
Yeah, how big. It matters. Maybe it should matter, right? It should matter that you have a consistently good year. It's really hard to make the tournament. But it's funny to think that February, like I remember as a player, like how different February felt from March to May. May feels like a whole different animal. And you guys know this, but you don't, as a college player, feel like you're the same player, same team that you were in February of that year.
I think the other thing, as the parity has grown, when you look at an ACC that you've always, kind of taken for granted, just having every team in the tournament, when one team doesn't fare as well, like UNC this year, or like the year that I guess it was 22, where Duke had a few of those extra losses, right? And they were the ones that got out along with Notre Dame, kind of like weighs your conference down, right? And then as like on the Ivy League side, the depth of the Ivy League has only grown over the years. But then if they don't get it done at a conference, then, and especially as the Big Ten has been more on the rise and Penn State's been more on the rise, it just bumps, and kind of tips the scales in terms of those at-large bids. And so, I think that's something, to be said too, which is great for the growth of the game. But also when the spots aren't expanding, it's just kind of tipping the scales of what we, was our normal, 8 to 10, 5 years ago.
I mean, would you have thought 4 Big Ten teams? Remember when obviously all the stuff between Michigan and Virginia happened, everybody started trashing the Big Ten after that. There's 4 Big Ten teams in the tournament right now. I would not have thought that
the reaction to those comments, those were fair though.
They were fair, but I also did kind of in my heart feel like the ACC's, got the Big Ten. Now 4 Big Ten teams in.
4 ACCs.
Yeah.
4 ACCs back to 1 Ivy, when a couple of years ago that was a huge, huge storm.
There would be 2 Ivies if Michigan didn't win.
Yeah.
The tournament, and that's just
Yeah, I see. Bringing back up Liam Murphy, he's a little upset that Michigan lacrosse doesn't get a seed in a home game, and he references back-to-back Big Ten champs. And so, I think again, it's just an example, like we were talking about early in the show. Got to go back to criteria. I tried to point out, hey, what does back-to-back have to do with
prior year performance does not factor into this year's tournament.
Prior performance does also not guarantee future results. Be careful with your investing.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I'm excited for the tournament. Great work in chopping it up. We really appreciate all of our viewers tuning in, and excited for a great week of prep. We'll look to get on the content. And guys, any closing thoughts from you guys?
Not for me. Appreciate everybody that hopped on. This was fun. I'm excited to to watch these teams compete for our championship.
Yeah, going to be a great tournament. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Good work, boys.
See you guys.